Hello, everyone. My name is Mac from Borderless Translations, and we're here out based in Tokyo, Japan. Konnichiwa.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth from Ouen Designs. I am based in San Diego, California, and I grew up in Thailand and Southeast Asia. สวัสดีค่ะ
Nice. So today, Elizabeth, what will we be talking about?
So this is a little segment that we do to give you experiences and observations and learnings from our own lives to help you communicate better.
Nice. All right. Tell me a little bit about, I guess, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where is your culture from?
Well, I grew up in Thailand, and Thailand, as well as most of Southeast Asia, was historically Indianized states. So a lot of our cultural traditions and values come from Indian culture, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And this is very ingrained in our societies, regardless of whether or not you are Hindu or Buddhist.
Mm-hmm. So I'm obviously not Japanese. So I am from, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but I've lived in Minnesota for the longest time. I've been here in Japan for about 4 years now. So I can talk about both sides, but today I will talk about Japan. So historically, Japan is an island nation, very closed off. But once, the Western world saw that, hey, we want to do trade with you, they kind of broke open Japan's shell, so to speak. And but as you know now, Japan has Buddhism as well, Shinto, but it's also has its unique culture of anime, manga.
Right.
But that might be for a separate talk.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you brought up when the West discovered Japan and kind of broke it open, because I do feel that while we have cultural foundations that come from history, we can't really dismiss how outside influences and especially imperialism has very much shaped cultural values, right? From everything from like how we dress to how we greet one another. What's considered like appropriate or inappropriate has definitely changed. Sometimes, internally motivated as well. I think that both Thailand and Japan have that history, right? Because Japan intentionally westernized, and then Thailand also intentionally westernized some of our dress and such in order to, I guess, fit in better with a Western idea of what's proper for different occasions.
Yeah. It's definitely, when they first started, it was a strict hierarchy class. You had your farmers, you had your artisans, you had your government workers, and then you had the samurai. And they each had different clothing styles to fit that lifestyle. But once Western culture kind of came, or I guess became more popular, then many of them switched to suits, more European styles of beauty standards. So yeah.
So, I mean, why are we having this conversation, right? Like, why is it really important to think about the cultural underpinnings of the places we live? Like, why is that important for communication?
Well, I mean, first of all, you don't want to get punched in the face. If I don't want to walk in, do something wrong. Oh, maybe I'm from America. I'm like, yeah, let's handshake. Japanese people rarely handshake. They rarely touch each other's body and, in a normal setting. So we want to make sure that communication is clear so that we don't have any accidents.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I actually feel that similar observation as well, because, a lot of times people will be like, kindness is universal. I'm like, that sentiment is true. Like your expressions of kindness, what's considered polite, isn't universal. And I think it's very hard, especially if you grew up in a society where your culture is pretty dominant worldwide,
Yeah.
right? Like you see aspects of it. And that's definitely the case because, you know, you grew up in the US, I'm living in the US, and a lot of folks who've, you know, spend most of their life here don't realize that values, or at least your expression of values, is not universal, right?
Yes.
It might be universal to be kind, but what that means in terms of your actions, even down to things like how you eat, is very different. And so you can intentionally do something to demonstrate kindness or respect, but come across very disrespectful in other cultures.
Exactly. You're right on point.
Okay, so I mean, you were talking about, for example, like a handshake in Japan. And so would you say, like, in terms of at least physical expression, Japan's more of a reserved society, or like, how would you categorize that?
So I think the best way to say it is that, so there is tatemae and honne. So tatemae is considered like your business face, right?
Okay.
The face you use for your outside group, right? So that is very reserved, is very polite. People might ask, you know, just to make sure, or are you a doctor? Are you a teacher? And people are very, you know, very conscious of, you know, hierarchy. Even though the hierarchy is not officially established, culturally it still remains. Of course, then you have honne, which is like the true face, and that's only shown to the inside group. And the inside group, that can be a lot more intimate, a lot more forthcoming with, you know, kind of your honest feelings. But of course, that takes time as well. So I'm going to say it depends on the situation. But if you are a stranger, or if you're in that outside group, strongly conservative. If you're in the inside group, slightly less conservative.
Right. And in Thai culture, how do I put it? Because, like, I feel like these things don't necessarily fall into like easily categorized groups.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, you know, how to avoid miscommunication, right? In Japan, you said people might ask, like, you know, are you a doctor? Are you a teacher?
Yeah.
Are you whatever, to understand what your relationship is to that person in society, to decide, I guess, the level of respect or formality to use with, like, is that about accurate?
Yeah, you're correct.
Okay, so in Thai culture, especially the further into the provinces you get, the warmth and the hospitality aspect is very, very prominent. So to the point where you might be like, oh, every like a lot of people will say, well, Thai people are so friendly. You know, I felt like welcomed like family immediately. So in that sense, it's less reserved.
Yes.
But on the other hand, back to things like the physical touch, right? If you offered a handshake to Thai people, especially if they are in the city and they're familiar with Western ways of doing business, they will return it. But you know, it's not the comfortable place for them, and it's specific to certain body parts. So like hands, usually just why, like that is a greeting. But if you're in the country, you might have somebody who, especially if they, let's say you're a visitor and you don't speak Thai, but you're experiencing the hospitality of a family, you know, they will do everything like nudge you, poke you, pat you on the back to be like, hey, food, you should eat more. So it's not all kinds of physical touch. It's just physical touch that's considered really intimate. Like generally, I think, you know, this is the case in Western society too. You don't just go and hold someone's hand. So using that as a greeting is really like, whoa, what? Like, I don't know you like that.
Yeah, you're here too long, man. Relax.
Right. On the other hand, like things that would be considered very, I guess, intrusive questions that might be considered rude, are actually designed to help establish that hierarchy, to decide, you know, how formally do I treat you. So an example in Thailand is people might ask you how much money you make, right? And that might be considered a really intrusive question in Western society because, oh, are you trying to judge me or, you know, compete with me? But actually, in Thai culture, especially to foreigners, one, there is an assumption that if you are a foreigner visiting, you probably make more money. And they're just asking you how much money you make in order to know like how much higher you are in rank. So maybe it's not really about like, are you a doctor or are you something, but they will ask you how much money do you make? So I know how to properly address you. Like, how much higher than me are you? So, but on the other hand, if you returned that as a foreigner to a Thai person, like if you, let's say you got offended and you're like, well, how much money do you make? Then you actually have created a little bit of rift because now they feel massive amounts of embarrassment because they're like, I already know I probably don't make as much as you, and now you're pointing it out. I was trying to be respectful, and now you just make me feel small. I mean, in the US, you have, you know, a lot of, say, sort of racial tension, cultural tension, just people butting up against each other. And some of it happens to be, you know, historical imbalances, and some of it happens to be just everyday misunderstandings, but it's, you know, very hard to detangle them. And, you know, I'm kind of both the mindset of like impact matters more than intent. On the other hand, like in situations where people have a good excuse for just not knowing something, because we make cultural assumptions every day, even though we're not thinking about them. Sometimes people will make a cultural assumption just because, or like an assumption about like why someone physically looks a certain way, just because they have no frame of reference whatsoever. So in those cases, I think like those questions might come across really rude or really obnoxious, but it does come from a genuine, complete ignorance, and not willful ignorance, but just, I don't know, and I don't even know where to start asking, except you. And like, I remember years ago, and this was when I was growing up in Thailand, there was a lady who worked cleaning houses. Like, so especially in the city, like a lot of families, middle class and above, have maids because just the labor cost is so much lower there. And so she saw I was reading like some English language teen magazine, and Tyra Banks was on the cover. And she's just like, whoa, is her skin like that naturally? Like, does she just spend a lot of time in the sun? And, you know, if you were in the US, I think that would be considered a really rude, like very obnoxious question. But that's under the assumption of how could you not know, right? And I mean, and that's kind of interesting on two parts, I think, for me in Thailand, because in Thailand, there are some places in the provinces and such where people are very dark skinned because of sunlight, because of, I mean, you know, dark skin is an adaptation to help us not burn, right? So that's very common. But at the same time, there's also your historical colorism based on like class rank of like, if you're a farm worker, you're one of the lowest of the low. And since a lot of times farm workers have dark skin because they've developed that from working in the sun all the time, then you know, dark skin means you're the lowest of the low. So while the question in and of itself is not an attempt to be rude or an attempt to be intrusive, but some of those views that come out of that might still be just, they're not necessarily that easily exposed. So there's definitely like layers of it. And like, I think that's one of the things that, you know, it's hard to navigate, but then also as a visitor, you end up going like, do I bring this up? Or, you know, this is literally my first time meeting someone and they're just asking a question that's been on their mind for so long. And I just need to let it go and just call it a quirk of like, yeah, people don't know how obtrusive that question is, but that's fine, right? Because I'm visiting and it's a battle I'm not going to pick today.
No, and you're right. It's when you're visiting, you can kind of play it off.
Right.
But when you're lived here, like I've only been here for 4 years, but there's other people who've been here for 20, 25 years, and they experience the same thing. So in terms of colorism is very complicated, especially if you are used to the colorism in America. So, you know, just like you said, sometimes when people see me, especially like children, right, they say, what happened to you? You got sunburned. I was like, no, I was just born like this. And they were like, oh, so you're okay? Yeah, I'm okay.
Out of the mouth of babes.
No, yeah, exactly. But as soon as I tell them, no, I'm okay, I was just born like this, they're like, oh, okay, and they're fine. But
Right.
like when you hear it from adults, you're just like where have you been living?
Are you even under a rock? Right. I mean, and you're
um,
based in Tokyo, so I mean, I guess that's
yes,
even more
exactly.
shocking. Where it's like, look, I'm not in like a small village somewhere where people, are very insulated from the world. Like I'm in a big
Yes.
city that, at least has a lot of internet access
Hmm.
and media access. So you should not be surprised, right?
Exactly. Or you should be at least a bit more like knowledgeable, but
Right.
that's also the kind of the downside of um, kind of the media, right? So it depends who's spinning the narrative, but we can do that at a different,
Right. At
that's
a
an
different
interesting
point.
topic
Yeah.
though. I like it though. But to remark on your colorism, so being an American versus being a non-American also plays into this. So as an African American, because I am from America, my status is seen higher. So but at the same time, right, if because of my skin tone might be considered lower. Now I've had a lot of Japanese people talk badly about Southeast Asians, and I actually had a person say, wow, their skin is so dark, it's dirty. And I'm like, I'm right next to her. I was like,
Just did not even compute, right?
yeah, I was like,
Right.
I was like, what about me? She's like, no, 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 no. That,
It doesn't
that's
count.
different. That's
Right.
different. I was like,
How's it different? Right. Right.
and so it's tough because a lot of Japanese people, for beauty standard, they'll like, for women they'll say, oh, your skin is so white, and that is like considered one of the highest compliments you can
Right.
give a woman in Japan. But I'm over here just rolling my eyes. I'm just like, yeah, I guess, okay. but
Right.
but how does that kind of affect you in terms of beauty standards versus like America versus like being in Thai?
I mean, and America as a whole other.
I know. Tell me about it.
So like I think we'll leave that to another day.
Hmm.
I think my pastor actually wrote a book about sort of like interesting racial things, and so I'll just quote one line from him. That's all I'm going to say about America for now. And my pastor's Black, and he said that people like a tan um, obtained in Hawaii, but not
Oh, okay.
a tan obtained in the womb. And I feel like
Ah.
very, very kind of poignant. It's like, you can't wait to show off something. And but in a way, I feel like that has played out in many ways throughout many parts of the world, all in history, because
Mm-hmm.
um something you're born with is not considered that special.
Yeah.
But getting a tan, like in the past, right, and the reason colorism exists as it is in Southeast Asia is partially because we've had East Asian imperialism throughout the centuries, right? We've had
Mm-hmm.
occupation, or at least like strong economic forces and influences from China, but then we also had Japanese occupation in various
Yes.
regions. So there is a standard of beauty that came from, like, well, these people are in power over us, they're clearly better than us, that ends up getting
Mm-hmm.
ingrained whether or not we want it to be. And
Yeah.
so their standards of beauty kind of affected us. But then it's also long-term classism, because in the US and in Europe, now being able to get a tan is the sign of leisure,
Yeah.
right? Whereas previously, like blue bloods meant that your skin was so transparent you could see your veins.
Mm-hmm.
So back then it was the same, right? Way back, European nobles were pale, and it was the people who worked out in the fields who were darker.
Yeah.
But now, being able to take vacations and sit on a beach and do nothing and lay out and get dark is the sign
Mm-hmm.
of leisure. So now that is valued if you're naturally white.
Yeah.
So whereas in Southeast Asia, being able to not have to work in the sun, so it still plays out the same way it did historically in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
is your sign of leisure. So that shows that I have more money, I have more class. And then obviously, since stuff builds up over generations, being like if your whole family is pale, then you came from a background of people who never had to work as hard as those people.
Yeah.
And then you split that into countries, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I don't know, like, oh, Malay are darker than such and such, so Malay must be lower class. Like their whole people must be lower class.
Yeah. They look at the lineage, right?
Right. So yeah, lots of complicated stuff there. For me, it's been interesting because I grew up with that. I kind of got annoyed with that. Sometimes, I have coworkers of my dad or something be like, oh, does your daughter play a lot of sports? And as your sort of like passive way of being like, is she outdoors all the time? Why does she look like that?
Why is she so dark?
But then, like, in a way, being in the US has been a little bit of reprieve from that. On the other hand, it is definitely shocking when I go back to Thailand and I see just how blatant it is. It's like there's a bus and a billboard and adverts on the monorail, and like all public transit is just like skin brightening cream, blah, 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 this, snail essence, blah, 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 whitening complex. And I'm like, whoa, it is everywhere. There's this drink you can drink that will, help you produce less melanin. I'm like, why would I want that?
No, melanin makes you happy. I don't why.
So like, it is interesting because I'm in the middle, right? I'm not your sort of ideal East Asian style glass skin type thing, but I'm also not like as dark as especially the indigenous in the south of Thailand or the folks who are out in the provinces as much. And so I'm kind of in the middle. So I'm like, I'm in limbo. I'm too dark for one, but definitely lighter than something else. But it is still interesting to hear that so blatantly brought up, right? It's like, oh yeah, so-and-so's dirty. I'm like, so yeah, we get that too, right? So-and-so's skin's dirty, or their hair is weird, just odd, like things like that.
Yeah. And, I'm very thankful that I am able to travel and kind of be exposed to these complex, things that are happening. And I think because of that, I'm able to kind of have deeper conversations about, these topics. And I feel like you feel the same way. Yeah.
For sure. We were talking about like open and reserved and like pointed questions and such. And one of the things I notice is, just along the lines of what's considered like reserved or open or conservative doesn't really fall along the same lines across cultures. And so, I mean, like, what is your observation on that in Japan? Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest ones might be nudity. So maybe in America, we're very conservative in a sense that we on TV, in the schools, we don't show pictures. We rarely talk about it. But in Japan, on TV, it's kind of okay to see nudity. They always, in fact, in anime cartoons, you always see like the kids, and that's okay. And so to take that even further, right, we're going to talk about bathing. So when they're young, Japanese parents and their children, they usually bathe together. In America, after a certain age, that stops. But in Japan, they have things called onsens, sentos, which is just like a hot spring bath. So they have public ones where people go in and have communal baths, and then it's just normal to bathe together, which is, for me, it's just like Japan is just originally just very conservative, no skin touch, but then as long as it's connecting through water, it's okay. So it's just it kind of
this is sort of all ages, all genders, like everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. So as you get older, it is divided by gender. So it is like men, and then this is like women. And then if you go further into the mountains, there are like mixed hot spring baths.
Okay. Yeah, I always find this interesting because every culture has, like, every culture that has been sort of exposed to the modern world has ended up picking up some values and influences from everyone else it interacts with.
Mm-hmm.
And in Thailand, 100 years ago, well, not even 100 years ago, there were still some places where it was normal to be topless, like everyone to be topless. Traditionally, our clothing came from India, so wrapped and draped clothing, not sewn clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very common for people, men and women, to more or less wear the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We have one piece of cloth that's we can wrap it as a loincloth, wrap it as a skirt, wrap it as pants, whatever
Wow.
was functional.
Just wrap it.
Right, just wrap it. Whatever was functional for what you needed to do. So like if you needed to hike it up further, all of a sudden it's short, or it's like loincloth status. But there wasn't this idea of like skirts belong on women only. And and then as far as the top, like topless was normal. Like if you needed to, women might bind their breasts mainly just to get it out of the way, or for decorative purposes, right? Like you're dancing, or you're in a formal occasion, you want an extra strip of something, but it's more for showing off than it is because like, oh no, it's inappropriate to show breasts. And then of course with like Western influence and the need to fall into the standards, right? And so like women started growing their hair out in central Thailand. And then it was like men should wear pants and women should wear skirts and women should cover their breasts. But some of that in the provinces didn't come about, like didn't fully get implemented until like the 30s and 40s. But nowadays you might see signs saying like Thailand is a conservative country, is a Buddhist country, show some respect and cover your shoulders, cover your breasts. Meanwhile, in the temples, you see, drawings of like topless women, and and it's not like it's not engaged in lewd acts or anything. It's just
it's just they're just hanging,
right? So I was like, okay, so it's okay for goddesses and and like these mystical like super karmic beings to be topless, and that's very Buddhist. Yeah. But it's very not Buddhist for a normal human being to be topless, or even show your collarbone or shoulders in the temple. Like it's just really interesting because even I think like it's important to remember that no matter what culture you're in, even those values will shift over time, right? So you can't just kind of apply universally everywhere. Something that wasn't okay 15 years ago might be okay now, or as people start to explore more and like address their own ignorance, maybe what was okay 15 years ago is no longer okay. You can't say that anymore because that's rude, and that's based on a terrible assumption about a certain group of people. So I think that happens everywhere, and it's really kind of important to see like, okay, what is the prevailing view now? And I guess at the end of the day, if we're talking about good communication, what can I do to do the least harm and offend the least amount of people, especially if I'm visiting somewhere or I'm a guest in the culture?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is just up to experience, right? So you can either experience it firsthand, and that would just be trial and error, right. or you can ask, one of us for, hey, I, learned from an expert, get the insider information, and so you can hit the ground running without running into any walls.
Right. Although I do feel that as long as they're not terribly offensive, like I can never talk to that person again, embarrassing moments do end up sticking as really good lessons, right? You remember them forever.
That's very true.
Insider informations. How would you say? Well, let's give an everyday example. Yeah. If I was visiting someone's home in Japan, what would be good things for me to know and keep in mind?
Okay. So number one thing is always bring a gift. It's always custom, and please don't make it expensive. You will trouble them greatly. Just buy it something cheap, maybe food related, something that you can all enjoy together. That's probably the number one thing you can do. Number two, once you give it to them, they will refuse it. But please do not do not take it back. Please.
Oh, fine then.
They'll just say, "Oh no, no, no!" Just keep bowing and keep saying "dozo, dozo," and then which is please, please go ahead. And so it's just their way of being polite. So they're just happy that you took the trouble to bring them something to enjoy. But just please keep
Insisting.
insisting. Yes.
So this is kind of a ritual almost. Like it's expected that you offer, it's expected that they refuse, and it's expected that you insist. And then, you've done the ritual, and then you can move on to the rest.
Exactly. It's a whole comedy routine. So now you're in, right? You've made it past the front door. So make sure you take your shoes off, right? So we in America, every household is a little different, but sometimes you take your shoes off, you leave it on, but in Japan, it's always off. They will, so when you go to the front door, there'll be like a big kind of step that lets you know that you should take your shoes off first and then
enter.
Yes. Right. Typically, most Japanese homes will serve you tea and light refreshments. So the light refreshments can be senbei, which is Japanese rice crackers, or if they really like you, they'll buy wagashi, which is traditionally made Japanese sweets.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. They'll give you home cooking. They will pour you drinks. If you do not want to keep drinking, do not finish your drink. Leave it like kind of like 1/3 down there. Because if you finish it and they see it, they'll be like, "Oh, let me pour you some more."
Right.
And they'll keep pouring you some more. So just keep that in mind. That's their form of hospitality.
Okay. So, here's the funny part. Like, because I grew up in Thailand, I know certain pieces of etiquette for visiting someone's home or, sharing a meal, but like, I don't actually know the rules. And I know that things are a little bit different across, city, different classes, country, whatever. I do know that for example, in family gatherings, it's, you must greet all of the elders first. Oh. And this is the same case if, let's say I were to bring a guest to my grandmother's house, right? I am responsible for the behavior of said guest, right? Obviously, if the guest says something that's entirely on them, then, they'd be like, "Oh, that person is so rude." But it's still also, why did you bring such a rude person?
Is this your friend?
Right. So, but that generally applies. And because we refer to our elders, actually, we refer to family members and generally people by a title. So even peers usually say P or Nong, like P meaning older and Nong meaning younger. But like with elders, there are definitely, I know that they are a great auntie. I have no idea what their government name is. Like I have never known in my life what their name is, because I greet them by auntie, great auntie, uncle, and so on and so forth. Name. And especially when it comes to very large family gatherings, sometimes, it's have you greeted Ai yet? Have you greeted so-and-so yet? And I might have greeted the same person 4 times. I don't know. If I'm being asked whether I have greeted them yet while I'm in the process of greeting someone else, I just do it again, because it is better to have done it multiple times than to accidentally miss an elder.
Oh.
And so, even in less, large kind of family, like special occasions, I feel like that is still a standard in Thai culture, where if you visit somewhere, you definitely make the point to greet everyone and why everyone, and you don't just kind of oh, I'm going to say hi to the owner of the house and go sit and do my own thing, right?
Yes.
And I think that's very, very important. The gift is expected. I don't, depending on the situation, usually there isn't as much of a sort of back and forth routine to it. Um, and then there are aspects from Chinese culture as well. So if you are visiting the house of someone, I guess, lower in rank than you, let's say that you are their boss at work or something like that, when you give a gift, you're also, you are expected to actually give a nicer gift, right? Because there is a patronage society type aspect to it. So the same thing, like bosses are expected to give people red packets or baskets or something for New Year's, for special holidays, for religious holidays, you know, or just bonuses at the end of the year. Like these are just things in the sense of like from the historical patronage society idea, like you are higher rank. This should be perfectly within your capabilities and also in your expectation, because because this person is under you, you are responsible for them.
Okay.
So if you are of a higher rank and you visited someone and you gave them a really crappy gift, it would just be seen as you're a very cheap person.
Yeah.
But that gift doesn't necessarily have to be I guess showy. It just has to be very thoughtful. And so very popular gifts are fruits baskets. Like in Thailand, tropical fruit, like that's just considered a really, you know, it's not like, oh, I got fruit. But I mean, we also I feel like Asia has better fruit.
that would be my thoughts. It's like, this is what you brought me.
I feel like Asia has better fruit because I'm like, oh, I have a basket of like specialty pears and melons and mangoes and stuff like that. Which is better than like if I got a basket of apples and bananas, I'd be like, man, this is disappointing.
I get this every day. I could.
Right. So I feel like Asia generally has better fruit, but then, you know, that basket might also include like a bottle of wine or like special crackers or something like that. So imagine your Asian equivalent of a charcuterie plate. So generally things that are considered somewhat more expensive, but also a little bit more practical. It's not like, oh, I got you a designer watch.
Yes.
Or something like that. So a little bit more thoughtful and obviously catered to social expectations. So Thai people don't drink that much wine. So they will accept a bottle of wine, but it probably will sit on their shelf as decoration forever.
Oh, I see. Then what's your drink of choice then?
Tea.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Tea. We drink beer socially, but you don't gift beer, really. Yeah. I mean, I did notice several years ago when I went back to Bangkok, like there's a now sort of craft beer movement, and it's just, you know, one of those like globalization things where like young people are into craft cocktails and craft beer now, even in Thailand, which was not really the case growing up. Like you can go to some specialty hotels and get some classic cocktails, and then you can go to certain bars and get like crazy sweet concoctions or things that will get you drunk really quickly. But
yeah,
you being drunk is just considered bad form.
Okay.
So like if you are, I guess, of more working class or stuff, there is definitely local liquors. And then, you know, there's the crazy stuff that people will say, but honestly, it's not as commonly drunk. Like people will be like, have you tried the snake liquor in Thailand? It's like, okay, not every Thai household makes snake liquor. It's a lot of times say like, this is a thing. Tourists like it. So we will make it and be like, hey, tourists, have you tried this? It's not like a thing that every household does. Just like, you know, moonshine isn't made across all households in America, right? It's a very
not. Oh my God, I've been lied to.
It's like that, but on the other hand, most commonly, like at meals or whatever else, like just in the house, we drink tea. We have a Thai coffee drink, but it's not really the same thing as like we don't do drip coffee or whatever as much. It's more like if you have Thai style coffee. It's either a syrup made of a coffee concentrate that's sort of poured over ice and blended with other things, or they will make a coffee thing out of like coffee grounds and instant coffee to make it extra strong, and then condensed milk and some other stuff. So it's really a coffee drink, not really like just plain coffee. But
Yeah.
we have tea. Tea is sort of the universal. And then
Mhm.
when it comes to alcoholic beverages, beer, ladies will probably drink, like, wine coolers are very popular.
Oh,
And
nice.
just something social, but nothing to get you really terribly drunk, because that's just considered like, oh, you must not be very classy if you let yourself get that drunk in public.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to kind of understand why like Japanese and Southeast Asians kind of have a little bit of tension going on. I mean, besides the obvious, colonism, right? But the so for Japanese, of course, the tea section is the same, right? They like teas. They have many different kinds of teas imported from different places. But in terms of alcoholic drinks, it's always kind of a light beer,
Mm.
and you are kind of expected to be drunk. And so, but the reason for their drunkenness is because there's, they always have to be under a high kind of conservative hierarchy. And so being drunk is kind of the exception to the rule, where you can laugh, you can be loud, you can kind of be more of yourself, because typically, throughout society, they are not allowed to do those things. So they use their drunkenness as kind of like, a socially acceptable excuse.
Gotcha. That's really interesting to me, because especially the part about like being loud and all that, because I feel like Southeast Asians are very loud. And I feel like that's also a very tropical culture thing.
Hmm.
So, I mean, obviously, I feel like there's a huge difference between what is acceptable of, we say high soul, so it means like high society,
Yeah.
like city folks, versus like in the provinces where like there might not be as much sort of like media and late night blah blah type entertainment. So house parties are a big thing. Just public, like people playing music in public is a
Hmm.
very public thing. So there's always some kind of sound and noise going on somewhere. And your idea of a party, if it's not noisy, how do you even know you're having fun?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, along those lines, would you say like then, I mean, I don't know, is house party culture or like jamming to music even a thing in Japanese culture? Like, this is the thing I honestly don't know. There's a lot of Japanese folks in Bangkok,
Hmm.
that's very common, but I don't think I've ever seen them party.
Well, okay, so there's a lack of houses. So that's probably one reason. So
Yeah,
there's
apartment parties.
so, but this is mostly in the big city though. If you're
Right.
in the countryside, they have a bit more house parties, but typically most kids will live with their parents for for as long as they can, and then they might get an apartment. But it is very hard for most typical Japanese people to own a house, or sorry, own a house
Mhm.
that is not, if you're not making like six figures or something. But this is yen, so it's not that bad.
Right.
The As for if you're in Tokyo, the party life is all about kind of the club scene. So if you're going to go clubbing, you have to be committed, because the train, you leave at midnight, and then the train stop at like 12:30, and then they don't start again until 5 p.m. So you have to be committed to party. So most people, they'll go to Tokyo, they'll go to a place called Roppongi, where a lot of the foreigners kind of hang out,
Mhm.
and they'll dance. They have Japanese people really like top 40 lists. Like it's kind of it's, sorry, I shouldn't sigh, but like but like every club you go to, it's just like the top 40. And it's just like, how can you get into a vibe? So I am very happy when I do find either like places that play only blues, or I find places that only play like R&B and hip hop, or places that only play like house. And so I like when places have themes, but typically a lot of Japanese people will dance to whatever.
Okay. So the point is just to go out.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
So it's not like, oh, I'm in the mood for such and such. It's like, no, we're just going out. Doesn't matter,
No,
we're going out. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah. I feel like in Bangkok, that's definitely the case because Bangkok is anywhere from 9 to 12 million people, depending on weekday or weekend, because we do have a lot of workers that come in during the weekdays and then go out during the weekends, and also people who even come from, and also seasonal workers and such. So it's very, very crowded. Very, very tall high rises, and similar to Tokyo. And so I guess in that sense, like, you don't have as many house parties the way you do in the country, but Bangkok also has a huge nightlife, but it's very different kind of like, what are you looking for? So I mean, like, a lot of the crazy, like, people like Bangkok nightlife is great as far as from the tourist perspective, is very much catered to tourists. Like, this is where the backpackers want to see some crazy stuff. This is where, like, these guys want to come and see, like, attractive women. This is where, but as far as themed, I feel like electronic music specifically is very, very popular in Bangkok. So a lot of the clubs, I guess in that sense, it's similar to the US, but like, but that was the case, decades before EDM was super popular in the US.
Yeah.
Thailand had, like, trance, techno, whatever. On the other hand, you still have some old school, like, hip hop clubs. You have local DJs making a name for themselves, spinning. You have DJ battles and stuff like that. But those are very specific. So, like, you go to this club if you are, like, a huge hip hop head. You don't just kind of like dabble in hip hop. And then you go to this club if, and then, your typical, like, fancy bars, your bougie bars, your rooftop, your skyline, your riverside, whatever will play your typical, like, club lounge popular mixes, right? So
sounds like the Japanese. Yeah, very similar.
Yeah. So and those, you're not there to dance. You're kind of there to, like, sit in fancy places in fancy clothing and be seen.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So it's very, very much like where you go partying is very dependent on, like, what crowd you run with and what you're looking for. And so, I mean, definitely haven't really heard top 40. If I hear top 40 in a Bangkok bar, it's probably just like a bar, like a neighborhood bar where you're not, it's not a dance club. It really is a, like, hey, you're here to hang out with someone and have drinks, and we just have something on, right? And people aren't really paying attention to what's being played.
Yeah.
I think that's the only case. All right. So in this last several topics, we covered cultural foundations and why that's important for clear communication. We covered things to think about, levels of formality and reservation. What else? We covered, I think, bathing culture and food.
Yep. Hospitality as well.
Hospitality.
And also how to refuse that hospitality if it doesn't match your palate or, let's say, your cultural beliefs.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, so what's one thing you learned that, really stuck with you from this talk?
About Japan specifically, definitely the fact that there are formalized terms for levels of formality, because I think every culture has an idea of how to behave among certain people in relation to you. But the idea that is kind of codified in a system of, like, this is formal behavior, this is close friends, sort of inner circle behavior, this is formal language, this is, I think that was one of the things that stick with me. And I feel like that would also be the longest ongoing learning process if I were ever to visit Japan, or for others who move to Japan, right? Learning all the intricacies of what is encompassed by those formal levels of interaction.
Oh, yeah, nice. I think for me, it's definitely of course, I really like the why, that's, I like this one. I guess the hospitality in terms of them bringing gifts, right? So they're really interested in knowing how much money you make in order, to be how polite to you, right? But then it's also the opposite, because once they know that information and you come to their house, right, then they're like, hey, I know how much you make, And so it's like, okay, I have to be really conscious about the gift that I present, because then I'm also insulting them a
Right.
different way if I'm not, if I'm not taking that into consideration.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, you don't have to give a designer watch, like I said, but it would
Yes.
be very strange to bring a bag of chips and they're like, "You're a CEO of what now?"
What if that's my company? What if I'm a CEO of a chip company? I feel
Well,
like I can get a
I don't know, a chips gift basket, a Lay's gift basket.
I
Something
I
you could.
gotta make it fancy. Okay.
Right.
Deal.
All right. So thank you for joining us, everyone. I am Elizabeth from Ouen Designs. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, and website. Links down below. And
And my name is Mac, and I'm from Borderless Translations. And I'm on everything: Facebook, Twitter, you name it. You can check it down below.
all right. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe.
Yes, subscribe. Bye.
Bye.